You carry it well. That's the first thing people notice about you. How composed you are, how steady, how you always seem to have it together, even when everything around you doesn't. They call you strong. They call you reliable. They come to you with their problems because somehow, without anyone deciding it, you became the one who handles things. And you do handle them every single time, but there is something no one sees. Something that happens after the conversation ends, after you've said the right thing, given the right advice, held the right amount of space for someone else's pain. Something that happens when you finally close the door and you are alone. In that moment, what happens to you? Watch the people around you carefully. Not the ones who are visibly struggling, not the ones who cry in public or cancel plans or say, "I'm not okay" when you ask. Watch the ones who always show up, the one who responds to every message, no matter how tired they are, the one who remembers every birthday, every small detail you mentioned months ago, the one who asks how you're doing and actually listens while quietly carrying something of their own that they haven't mentioned to anyone, the one everyone describes, without hesitation, as fine. These people are not fine, not always, not underneath. They have simply become very, very good at something most people never learn. They have learned to carry weight without letting it show. And the longer you do it, the more years you spend perfecting it, the better you get. The weight becomes familiar. The carrying becomes automatic. And the gap between how you feel and how you appear grows so wide, so gradually, that one day you look across it and can no longer remember when it started. This is not a modern phenomenon. Humans have always had to mask. In small tribal communities, showing weakness was dangerous. Showing instability risked exclusion from the group. And exclusion meant death. So the brain learned to perform stability, to present a version of the self that was safe, acceptable, unthreatening. For most of human history, this was a survival tool. The problem is that the brain never received the message that the danger had passed. So the masking continued. It was taught to children. Don't cry, be strong, pull yourself together. It was rewarded in workplaces. The composed one gets promoted, the emotional one gets managed. It was celebrated in culture, stoicism as virtue, vulnerability as weakness. And somewhere along the way, the mask stopped being something you put on before you walked out the door. It became something you forgot you were wearing. It became your face. Here is what psychology tells us about people who seem fine. There is a phenomenon researchers call emotional masking, the deliberate suppression of visible emotional expression to conform to social expectations. It is not the same as not feeling. It is feeling everything, and choosing, consciously or not, to show none of it. Studies on emotional labor show that chronic masking carries a measurable cost. It increases cortisol levels. It depletes cognitive resources. It creates a specific kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical tiredness, an exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. Because the work never stops. Even in rest, the masked person is monitoring, checking, making sure nothing is leaking, making sure the version of themselves they have presented to the world stays consistent. Psychologists call this self-monitoring, and for people who do it at high levels over long periods of time, it becomes so automatic that they no longer experience it as effort. It simply becomes the way they exist. They forget that other people don't do this, that for some people, the inside and the outside are roughly the same thing, that some people feel something and it simply appears on their face, without negotiation, without editing, without cost. For the person who has been masking since childhood, that kind of transparency is almost unimaginable. Now here is where it gets complicated. The people who carry the most are often the ones least likely to be offered help. Not because the people around them don't care, but because they don't know. The signal that someone needs support is usually visible distress, tears, withdrawal, a change in behavior. These are the cues that make someone reach out and ask, "Are you okay?" But the person who seems fine sends none of those signals. They show up, they function, they smile at the right moments, but they don't show up. They don't show up when the world needs them. They absorb the room's energy without depositing any of their own, and so the people around them assume everything is okay. Of course they do. Why wouldn't they? Everything looks okay. Everything has always looked okay. This creates a specific kind of loneliness that is almost impossible to explain to someone who hasn't lived it. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who genuinely care about you and still feeling completely unseen. Not because they don't want to see you, but because you have become too skilled at making sure they don't. You built the walls so well that even the people who love you can't find the door. There is a paradox at the center of all of this. The stronger you appear, the more strength is expected of you. Every time you handle something with composure, you teach the people around you that you can handle things with composure. Every time you absorb a difficult moment without visible reaction, you communicate that difficult moments don't affect you much. You train the people in your life, without meaning to expect your stability. And then that expectation becomes a weight of its own. Because now, showing anything other than fine doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It feels like a betrayal, like letting everyone down, like cracking a version of yourself that people have come to rely on. So you keep going, you keep carrying, you keep showing up composed and steady and reliable. Not because nothing is wrong, but because the cost of admitting that something is wrong now feels greater than the cost of continuing to pretend it isn't. That is the war. Not dramatic, not explosive, not visible from the outside, just quiet, continuous, invisible. The daily effort of maintaining a self that was built for other people's comfort rather than your own survival. The war no one knows is happening. The war you have been fighting, alone, perhaps for longer than you can remember. So what does this mean? If you recognized yourself somewhere in this, not as a diagnosis, not as a label, but as a pattern you know from the inside, then perhaps the only question worth sitting with is this: who taught you that you had to be fine? Because somewhere, at some point, something happened. A moment that made you decide, or simply feel, that your struggle was not safe to show, that your pain was too much for the room, or not enough, or simply not something the world had space for. And so you adapted, the way humans always adapt, by becoming what the situation required. The tragedy is not that you learned to carry things quietly. The tragedy is that you learned to do it so well that even the people who love you most stopped thinking to check. You are allowed to put it down, not for everyone, not all at once, but somewhere, with someone. In some small, honest moment, you are allowed to say, "This is heavy. I have been carrying this for a long time, and I am tired." Because the war doesn't have to be silent forever. It just has to start somewhere to be seen. And sometimes, that somewhere is simply the quiet moment when you stop performing for yourself, when you sit with the weight instead of carrying it, and let it finally be real.